Hey everyone, good morning. It is so good to meet all of you. Thank you so much for joining us to learn a little bit more about House Bill 123 this morning as it applies to sources of strength in your schools starting in 2023. My name is Kristen Musselman, and I'm joined by the lovely Mish Moore. Mish, go ahead and give a lovely wave. Thank you so much. We are both from the Sources of Strength National team. And we want to make sure that adult advisors, teachers, counselors, school admin feel supported as schools in Ohio move toward implementing House Bill 123 this fall.
Yeah, absolutely. We can't see everyone. So Kristen and I are not totally positive how many of you are familiar with sources of strength, but we're assuming that we're probably on here with some old friends, some new friends. For those of you who might be newer to sources, we are a best practice youth mental health promotion and suicide prevention program. We're designed to harness the power of peer social networks and create healthy norms and culture, ultimately preventing suicide, violence, bullying, substance misuse.
Absolutely. And our mission at Sources of Strength is to prevent those adverse outcomes by increasing well-being, help-seeking, resiliency, healthy coping skills, trust toward adults, and belongingness. Sources of Strength moves beyond a singular focus on risk factors by utilizing an upstream approach for suicide prevention. This upstream model, we believe, strengthens multiple sources of supports or protective factors for young people so that when times get hard, they have strengths to rely on.
Yeah, Sources of Strength has teams all over the world, particularly in North America. So from Florida to Manitoba, from San Francisco to Brooklyn, there are groups of students and adults who are working together to make their schools and communities safer, more positive places to be. This has for sure been the case in Ohio as well, where a whole lot of schools have joined in starting teams over the last several years.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were so impressed by Ohio's hard work and commitment to implementing sources, especially as many of our schools started implementing sources of strength in the Zoom room with us in 2020. During that year, Ohio passed House Bill 123 to be implemented by this upcoming fall in 2023. Sources has been working with our partners at the Ohio state level to meet the needs of that House Bill 123 requirement. So what's the purpose of today's webinar? The purpose is to clearly outline those requirements of what House Bill 123 is and how these requirements impact any changes schools may need to make to their suicide prevention protocols that are already in place at their schools. So we will cover House Bill 123, as well as how sources of strength can be used to meet those needs of those new legislative requirements. What our goal today is that we can educate you all on what House Bill 123 is, how your Sources of Strength team can meet those new legislative needs, and also what action steps and action items you may have for your school and community. On our end, Sources of Strength National is preparing our trainers with the knowledge of the new legislation, module adaptations for our adult advisor trainings, as well as peer leader meeting resources to support House Bill 123.
The vision of Sources is to empower a well world. And we really believe that this legislation can provide a supportive environment to both students and staff to empower that well world together. So that's enough of us talking. Without further ado, we introduce HB Roberts to walk us through HB 123. So HB, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name is HB Roberts. I'm the Youth Program and Policy Manager for the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, and I'm the lead at OSPF on Sources. I also get to work with the wonderful Julie Cameron, who is my counterpart at Prevention First, and I'll let her introduce herself in just a moment. I'll mention for everybody, if you don't actually know what House Bill 123 is, don't worry, we're going to cover that later. For now, all you need to know is that this is Ohio-specific legislation that goes into effect this fall, just as Mish and Kristen covered. and that it requires schools to have an evidence-based suicide prevention program in place. So if you want to implement sources to meet the Safe Students Act's suicide prevention requirements, then we're actually going to be working together to prep your school and prep your local trainer. So this is a bit of a two-step process. So to prep your school, whenever you reach out to start the implementation process, we'll ask if you're intending to implement sources to meet the requirements of House Bill 123. If you say yes, we'll work with you and the person conducting your adult advisor and peer leader training to include a 30-minute module on House Bill 123 during the adult advisor training. After that training, the adult advisors will be able to find all of the House Bill 123 materials on the Sources of Strength Ohio website starting March 14th. If you're a local trainer or a provisionally certified trainer who's conducting a co-training with the Sources of Strength national trainers, we'll also need to prep you. When the national trainer and the local trainer meet to go over the set list, they'll decide where to put the House Bill 123 module. It'll go more towards the end of the training, but it also makes a lot of sense for us to make sure that, a bunch of other stuff is covered beforehand and that we also have plenty of time to get back to the main context for Sources of Strength before the end of the day. And then the Ohio trainer is going to deliver the House Bill 123 module. Sources national trainers will be a little familiar with the legislation, but we're really depending on the Ohio trainer to know their stuff here. And don't worry, you can always reach out to Julie and I if you need more support. Your adult advisor training will be the exact same as normal, except for the addition of this 30-minute House Bill 123 module. And we're going to go ahead and demonstrate this for you all in just a minute or so. And if you need to see it again, don't worry, because this webinar is going to be posted on the Sources of Strength Ohio website by March 14th. So before we start, we'll want to share a little bit of context for today's webinar, some assumptions that are helping to frame today's presentation. So this presentation is meant to model the House Bill 123 training module that will be included in the adult advisor training that every school is required to conduct prior to implementing sources. As such, we'll make a few references to modules that are covered at earlier points in the adult advisor training, but obviously we haven't actually done an adult advisor training today. If those references are confusing to you and you'd like more information about what's going to be covered, please feel free to ask a question at the end of the webinar or schedule an appointment with us to learn more. Second, in modeling a module from the adult advisor training, this presentation assumes that you're already familiar with the Sources of Strength secondary program. If that isn't true for you, then you'll still learn a lot about House Bill 123, but you might want to schedule an appointment with Julie Cameron to learn more about the program itself. And you can do so by visiting calendly.com/Julie-prevention, and we'll put that link in the chat in the House Bill 123 supplemental materials that will be posted on our website. Third, during an actual adult advisor training, you'll receive paper copies of the documents that we'll be referencing today. For today, we'll encourage you all to download the adult advisor packet and refer to the individual handouts as we talk about them. So if you're watching live, I'm going to go ahead and put that link in the chat now. And you should be able to review that packet. And if you're watching a recording of this presentation, you'll be able to download the handout from the Sources of Strength Ohio website starting March 14th. And then finally, as a generic House Bill 123 module presented today, this webinar is not going to cover every school's specific implementation plans for either sources or House Bill 123. If you have a question that you think is going to apply to lots of other schools, please feel free to type it into the question and answer box or the chat box, and we can talk about it during the Q&A toward the end of the webinar. And if you have a question that's specific to your school, please reach out to me at ev.roberts@ohiospf.org or schedule an appointment with me at calendly.com/ev-roberts. All right, now that we've got the introductions out of the way, I'll pass things off to Julie.
Thanks, Evie. I appreciate it. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm Julie Cameron, and I'm with Prevention First in Cincinnati. Evie and I work hand in hand in Ohio to spread this program, Sources of Strength, throughout Ohio. So today we will be talking about Sources of Strength and the approach for House Bill 123. So we know that the Safety and Violence Education Student Act, which we know as the Save Students Act, formerly House Bill 123, it was passed by the Ohio General Assembly in the fall of 2020. And the goal of this legislation was really to increase students' emotional and physical safety by integrating evidence-based practices and programs and approaches. So part of this legislation includes kind of a multi-pronged approach. It includes suicide and violence prevention, social inclusion, threat assessment teams and training, anonymous reporting systems, and emergency management programs. Today, we are going to focus on that suicide prevention component. But just so you know, there are those additional requirements beyond today's scope of presentation that will help schools develop that comprehensive approach. Also, for today's purposes of the presentation, we are going to assume, like Evie said, that your school has already chosen sources of strength to meet the requirements of the Save Students Act. We'll talk about the legislation, what that is, and then how sources can be implemented to help your school reach compliance. All right, so when we look at the House Bill key requirements, there are 3 specific requirements that we really want to look at as it relates to suicide prevention. So first, we want to make sure that the school is implementing an approved program. Again, Sources of Strength is on that approved program list. So we are approved there and can proceed. Next, we need to make sure that Sources of Strength and this approved program goes through grades 6 through 12. So all students in grades 6 through 12 must receive the programming. And the programming that we are referring to would need to be included in 1 hour or standard class period of instruction. So as you might have guessed, right, Sources of Strength is one of those approved programs, but maintaining compliance with this legislation isn't as simple as just implementing sources. And we'll get into the details of how our approach to implementing it with House Bill 123 is how we need to do it to meet compliance. Next slide. So when we looked at those approved program must, what do they need to be? And when we're referring to approved program must, what we're referring to is on the list of suicide prevention approved programs, what do those programs have to include? And the first is it needs to be evidence-based. We know that Sources meets this requirement easily. Secondly, it also must cover specific content, and that content relates to suicide risk factors and warning signs. So we'll go over each of those content requirements next, but you can refer to the Save Students handout. And there will also be one in the Adult Advisor packet to be able to review those full content requirements now.
The first content requirement for approved programs is that they instruct school personnel on how to identify the signs and symptoms of depression, suicide, and self-harm in students. There's a bit of an overlap here with another section of the Ohio Revised Code that requires school personnel to engage in a biannual staff suicide prevention training. And so it's important to note that your school may already be utilizing a training that fulfills this exact part of House Bill 123. Now, during the Adult Advisor training, you can check in with your participants by doing a quick poll. You know, something like, let's do a quick show of hands. So for today's presentation, to kind of model how this part of the training would go, we'll do a quick virtual poll. So go ahead, get your pointer fingers ready. We'll give you a few moments to answer the first question. First, I want to know, does your school have a training in place to satisfy this biannual suicide prevention training? There are lots of different options for this. You might have something that was created by your school. You might have your entire staff engage in an annual question, persuade, refer training called QPR. You might even do something like Cognito, which is a self-paced set of modules that is available for free by reaching out to the Ohio Suicide Prevention Foundation, or something else that hasn't been covered here. All right, we've got about 40 responses, so I'm going to go ahead and end the poll in 3, 2, 1. And we will share our results. All right, so out of the 49 of you who answered this poll, 16 people said yes, they already have a training in place that satisfies this requirement. That's fantastic. In that case, you wouldn't have to move any further with this particular provision and you'd be able to continue moving forward. However, if you wanted to, you could still use sources to help supplement this kind of a training. Because as we all know, there's nothing wrong with getting a little bit of extra suicide prevention training for your staff. For those of you who said no, we're going to cover that in just a few moments. And then for those of you who said, I'm not sure, it'd be pretty easy for you to go ahead and just do a quick check-in with your administration whenever you got done with this training to be able to see what you guys have in store. And then we'll go through and do a second poll. So now I want to know, does the training that you guys have in mind cover the content that is listed on this slide? So again, that content is how to instruct school personnel to identify the signs and symptoms of depression, suicide, and self-harm in students. We'll give you guys about another 20 seconds or so to answer that question. Looks like we've got about most of our responses. So I'll end the poll in 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much to the 43 participants who answered that poll. 15 people said yes, that training covers the content listed on the slide. So again, you guys are good with this provision, but you are more than welcome to use sources to supplement that existing training. For the 4 people or 9% of participants who said no, then you'd be able to use sources to meet this requirement. And then for the 24% of participants who said, 56% of participants or 24 participants for the live presentation who said you're not sure, you could just go ahead and check in with your administration to see what they've got going on for this. And then final poll question. I want to know if your school has already conducted a training on this content for this year. We'll give you guys about 30 seconds as well. All right, we'll give you another couple of seconds. So the question is, has the school already conducted a training on this content this year? And that is going to be a training on a biannual suicide prevention training for the staff. And we've got 48 responses coming in. So 25% of participants said, yes, the school has already conducted the training for this year. Now, most of these adult advisor modules are going to be conducted in the fall. So you might have folks who are intending to conduct that training later on in the year, in which case you just want to check in with them that, if you don't already have something trained, which is what 35% of folks in the poll have said, that you could just check in with them and say, well, do you guys have time to schedule this training, and kind of go through some options to make sure that they get that done, or at least that they're already starting to think about when they could create space for this kind of training. And then for the 40% of folks who are not really sure what's going on, just make a note to be able to check in with your administration and see if this is something that they've already got covered, or if this is something that your Sources of Strength group can help to complete. All right, thank you very much for running through that with me really quick. Now, if you answered no to all of these questions, I mentioned that you can implement Sources of Strength to meet this provision. And we would specifically refer you to the Risk Factors and Warning Signs module that can be conducted with adult staff. This module is already conducted as part of the Sources of Strength peer leader trainings. So the good news is that adult advisors will get to see how it's done whenever the Sources of Strength team comes in and trains those students. But you can also find a copy of the Risk Factors and Warning Signs module within your adult advisor packet. This module takes about 15 to 20 minutes, just depending on how it's run, and it models instruction on how to identify the signs and symptoms of depression, suicide, and self-harm in students. Now, if this were an actual adult advisor training, we would take this time to brainstorm options for how the adult advisors can bring this information to their school personnel. So let's go ahead and get a few answers from the chat just so that we can see how this might go. All right. So if you're watching the live presentation right now, I want you to think about when you could conduct this 15 to 20-minute risk factors and warning signs module with your school staff. If you wouldn't mind, go ahead and type your responses into the chat. Ready? 1, 2, 3. What do we got going on? Staff meeting. Thank you very much, Trisha. Couple of other folks suggesting a staff meeting. Yeah, hopefully this would be an opportunity for folks to be able to come together and for the adult advisors to review that training module with the entire staff. This might also be conducted during a professional development meeting, which I also see a couple of times in the chat. We've got one person who says they've got 10-minute meetings scheduled on Tuesdays. So that might require a little bit of adaptation. So maybe you start the conversation with the staff and then conclude it on a different time. It would just be important whenever covering the kind of sensitive information that is a part of this module that we don't leave our participants in kind of a sensitive space, that we create space to kind of ramp those emotions up while we're engaging folks and then also help them bring back down. So in that case, it might take more than 2 Tuesdays to be able to cover that information, just to make sure that we get the chance to take care of everybody's needs in that space, but it wouldn't be impossible whatsoever to do so. All right, thank you very much. Really glad to see that we've got a lot of folks who think that professional development days would be a good opportunity for this. I know that sometimes it's pretty tough to find time for just one more thing to happen during those professional development spaces. All right, so if anything that we just mentioned is not really an option for your school, then you would take some time to during this module to chat with your fellow adult advisors and then to make a plan. If it turns out that this module isn't a good fit for you because you can't get the staff together, then you can consider those other options that I mentioned earlier on this slide. And then I'll also note for the local trainers in the crowd that your objective in this moment isn't to create a concrete plan for how and when the adult advisors can conduct this module with the rest of the staff. Rather, it's to get the adult advisors thinking about when they could introduce this content to other staff members. So you could get a few popcorn answers and move on. And depending on your relationship with the participants in that adult advisor training, you could also offer to conduct this risk factors and warning signs module for their staff. It just really all depends on whether or not that is something that you're able and willing to do for that group. Otherwise, we would expect that the adult advisors should be able to run through that module with the rest of the staff. All right, the second content requirement is how to identify appropriate mental health services within schools and larger communities, and when and how to refer youth and their families to those services. And this one is going to be really individualized because, of course, every school is different. Every school's mental health resources are different, and they all have different protocols on how they should work with young people to access those resources. And for that reason, we're going to refer you all to Sources of Strength's Suicide Intervention Protocol, which is another handout from the Adult Advisor Training Packet. This handout is first introduced in an earlier adult advisor module called the Significant Events and Protocol Review module, which is something only the local trainers will really understand. But for those who would be attending an actual adult advisor training, it's really just important to note that this content has already been covered and that this is a resource that's available for them to refer to. And it really just helps them to connect the dots between what Sources is already doing and House Bill 123's requirements. So this protocol, once you get a chance to review it for yourselves, outlines the key pieces of a comprehensive school suicide intervention protocol, such as that annual training discussed during the last slide. And that's really it for the staff requirements. So if you have more questions about those staff requirements, make sure to get those questions into the Q&A in the chat, and we'll be sure to cover them at the end. All right, as you can see, the remaining content requirements are for our young people, for our students in grades 6 through 12. And House Bill 123's remaining content House Bill 123's remaining content-related requirements, didn't realize that was going to be so much of a tongue twister, those are all covered by 4 of Sources of Strength's templated campaigns, which are listed on the screen now on the right. And so we'll read off those requirements really quickly. It's things like how to identify the signs and symptoms of depression, suicide, and self-harm in their peers. So very similar to that staff requirement, except for now we're extending it to those young people. It also includes how to teach young people about mental health and depression, warning signs of suicide and the importance of and processes for seeking help on behalf of self and peers and reporting of these behaviors. Third, how to identify observable warning signs and signals of individuals who may be a threat to themselves or others. And fourth, the importance of taking threats seriously and seeking help. To reach all students in grades 6 through 12 for 1 hour of instruction, it'll be important for the adult advisors to work with their peer leaders to plan activities with the necessary scope. And so to help you all with that, I'll recommend that you check out the blank Sources Campaign Planning template from your adult advisor training packets. You'll also see that there are planning templates for each of the campaigns listed on this slide. And Sources teams can easily use these campaigns to cover the content within the legislation's 1 hour requirement. And if you are already steeped in Sources, then you know that Sources is big on having the teams create their own campaigns. And so this provision doesn't prevent you from doing that. And in fact, if you wanted to create your own campaigns to fulfill House Bill 123, then you would be more than welcome to do so. And you can do that either as a supplement to these 4 campaigns or as a substitute for them. And for that reason, we have included a blank template in addition to those specific templates. On the screen now, you'll see a couple of materials from each of those templated campaigns. So I'll mention that in addition to this campaign planning templates, Sources also offers guidance on how to implement these campaigns on their website and starting on page 55 in their Adult Advisor Field Guide, which are offered during the actual Adult Advisor trainings. Comprehensive guides on each of these 4 campaigns can be found in your Adult Advisor packet. We recommend that the adult advisors review these before their peer leader training if they have time for inspiration on different activities that can be implemented as part of each campaign. You can also visit the Sources of Strength website to see pictures and videos of what other Sources teams have done with these campaigns. All right, I hope that this slide looks a little familiar. So we've covered the content requirements of the approved program, and now we're going to go ahead and jump back to those other requirements. As mentioned earlier, the Safe Students Act requires the approved program to engage all students in grades 6 through 12 for 1 hour or standard classroom period. That 1 hour can be split up over the course of several class periods, and your standard classroom period can run a little bit shorter or a little bit longer than 1 hour, depending on your individual school's class schedule. So I mentioned that just in case you have, say, a 50-minute block, if that is your standard classroom period, then you wouldn't have to find an extra 10 minutes during a different class to be able to fulfill that 1 hour. You'd be covered by just having an entire class period that's been dedicated to fulfilling that content. And now we come to the 1 hour of instruction, or that 1 standard classroom period. Now, earlier in the adult advisor training, we would have discussed the various ways that campaigns can take shape, including wall displays and presentations. To reach every student for at least 1 hour standard classroom period, we would encourage Sources teams to focus on all school activities or classroom activities that can help them reach compliance with the legislation. In the templated campaigns, you'll see several examples of how campaigns can be implemented within the classroom, such as by having teachers plan a lesson around depression and anxiety, or having peer leaders present on what to do if their peers are struggling with their mental health. And that could even take place within one of the Trusted Adult campaigns, since we encourage young people to get connected with a trusted adult if they're struggling or if they're in need of that extra support. But you can also plan an activity that involves the entire school, like a school assembly or a peer leader activity before a pep rally. Finally, your individual schools might have unique options for classroom time, such as an advisory period that's attended by the entire student body for 20 minutes a day every morning. The planning templates in your adult advisor packets have been designed to help your sources teams plan campaigns that reach every student for at least 1 hour per year. And this can help your sources team make sure that your activities have an impact on the entire student body.
Thanks, Evie. So in your field guide, you'll see a series of fidelity markers, and those ensure that your team is successful with the implementation of the Sources of Strength program. In those fidelity markers, you'll have things focused on planning and training and follow through. And for Ohio schools, we have a list of fidelity markers to ensure that you're focused and you're able to comply with the Safe Students Act. Now, we don't have all the text on the slides here, so you'll want to refer to your manual. However, let's go through a few of them. So our adult advisors receive training on the requirements of House Bill 123 during the adult advisor training. So we are hoping today, like Evie had suggested earlier, that we're kind of simulating what your adult advisor training would be like. And in that adult advisor training, you would have checked that requirement off, right? You're giving the requirements about what is required for House Bill 123. Next, adult advisors and peer leaders completed campaign planning templates. And those were the ones Evie was referring to that ensure that you also fulfill the requirements of House Bill 123. Now, with those campaign templates, you'll be able to see that every student would be engaged in at least 1 hour, right? So that's one of our fidelity markers that we're checking off when we're planning out our campaign. And then also, as we plan out that campaign, we want to make sure that we're covering House Bill 123's required content, which is what we just kind of went over right there. So this is the beginning of the look at the fidelity markers checklist. And again, for our special Ohio schools, we are able to include that within the training manual as well. Next slide. So after today, should you have any questions, we most certainly are here to help. As it relates to the Safe Students Act, Evie and I are happy to assist you. We can talk to you about, again, what was covered in this webinar today, how we can ensure that your school is complying with House Bill 123, if that's the approach you are taking with Sources of Strength. We can also talk to you about funding associated with Sources of Strength and what we're doing here specifically in Ohio. If you want more information about implementation, training, or technical assistance, you can reach out directly to the national team, and you can contact Cody. His email is here, or you can reach out to the community of trainers and adult advisors in your Sources Slack channel. And that was something that was another tongue twister. That was something as well that is in the T4T and the adult advisors would be aware of. If at any point in time you don't know where to go, circle back to us. Evie and I are always here to help. And again, use that info at sourcesofstrengthohio.org to reach either one of us.
Yeah, I actually have a question. When you say staff, are you meaning all of the teachers, or are you saying every single adult who plays a role within the school needs to receive this training?
The House Bill 123 training module only needs to be implemented with the adult advisors, but those adult advisors would be the ones responsible for helping to meet the provisions related to staff. All right, so the first content requirement says how to instruct school personnel to identify the signs and symptoms of depression, suicide, and self-harm in students. So that would cover your teachers, but it would also cover your cafeteria workers, your library workers, your school bus drivers, and that wide approach to school personnel is also included in that second biannual suicide prevention training that I also referenced. And then our other one just mentions that the approved program has to cover how to identify appropriate mental health services within schools and larger communities. And it doesn't necessarily specify who that is talking to. So for us, we're making sure that the school is aware of of what their suicide intervention protocol is. We're making sure that the adult advisors are aware of that, and then also encouraging them to create campaigns that can support other people to understand what that protocol looks like. So if, for example, you had students and staff who were not aware that there was, a school psychologist who was actually on site, then you might create a campaign or schedule a couple of campaign activities that are focused on getting the word out about how to get connected with that local psychologist. So if, for example, there's an open door policy so that students can just walk straight into that school psychologist office whenever they need help, then that's a very different awareness campaign than if you need to schedule some kind of a trusted adult activity that encourages young people to reach out to their favorite teacher and ask to be referred to a school psychologist. The important thing is for everybody to understand what is required for them to be able to get help, or if they need to refer to other kinds of resources, such as getting contract or being able to get contacted to a community-based mental health clinician, or even referring to the crisis text line as an opportunity to get connected to help. But thank you so much for running through that. So since we've got different participants in the audience, I'm sure that we've got local trainers who would be preparing to actually conduct this training with their adult advisors. And then we would also have prospective adult advisors who honestly might get this training today and then also receive it with their local trainer whenever they go over this information in the adult advisor training. And then for any administrators who are interested in learning about the House Bill 123 approach, this should be a nice overview. And so if you also want other folks to understand what's required for their school, should they use sources to implement House Bill 123, you can either refer them to this recording or you can connect them to us, and we'd be happy to go over that with your staff as well. Now, it does look like we have a couple of things in the chat. So Jesse Martin wants to know if Sources of Strength covers the social inclusion programs. So I'll let you all know that right now, Sources of Strength is only approved to meet the requirements for the suicide prevention and violence prevention requirements. Social inclusion has a different set of programs and provisions associated with it. And so I would recommend that you go to the Save Students Act website for more information on how to reach the social inclusion aspect of that requirement. So if you want to reach out to sources specifically about how you can use this program to meet the requirements, then feel free to reach out to us. If you have questions more generally about House Bill 123, including things like the social inclusion program that's not covered by sources, then we would recommend reaching out to Sarah, and we'll include her contact information in the chat as well as our supplemental materials as well.
Thanks to both of you. And just in regard to follow up with Evie's comment about social inclusion, there is no program that we are aware of on the list that covers both social inclusion and suicide prevention, as well as violence prevention. So just to throw that out there and to help you with that, or not help you with that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing up the violence prevention piece as well, Julie. So as we've been told by the Ohio Department of Education, for schools who want to meet the violence prevention piece as well, they would need to conduct an additional hour of that instruction for folks to be able to reach compliance with both the suicide prevention piece and the violence prevention piece. So if you want to use sources to reach the requirements for suicide prevention, then you would follow everything as we've just done it here. And then if you also wanted to meet the requirements for violence prevention, then you would just need to find an extra hour of time for that violence prevention piece. All right, so Ashley asked if there are specific campaigns or modules that would align with the violence prevention component. Ashley, there are no specific campaigns, but the nice thing is that the content requirement that is related to violence prevention is talking about the school's anonymous reporting system. So as we've been directed by ODE, schools would really only have to instruct their students and their staff on how they can support that school's anonymous violence reporting system to be compliant with that violence prevention piece. So you don't have to cover any additional content. And part of that is because Sources of Strength and its evidence base has been demonstrated to impact not just suicide, but also those other interrelated risk and protective factors, such as mental illness, bullying, violence. It's all kind of covered because Sources is such an incredible upstream program. And it's also important for schools to participate in an annual retraining, which is also covered by Sources of Strength Ohio. And so this is a brief training where we're able to really onboard those new peer leaders and those new adult advisors, so they understand what Sources is, and you're not trying to play catch up to be able to get them to understand what this program is. But what's also nice is that we'll be including the HB123 module within those annual retrainings as well. So that way you don't have to schedule like a separate HB123 training module. We can just fold this straight into your annual retraining. All right. Well, hopefully we've tuckered you guys out for now, but feel free to reach out to us at sourcesofstrengthohio.org if you have additional questions. Like I mentioned earlier, feel free to schedule an appointment with us. I referenced a couple of different people and a couple of different links to be able to get in contact with us, but if all else fails, just reach out to info@sourcesofstrengthohio.org and just let us know what you need and we'll put you in the right direction. Thank you so much for everybody for being here today. Thank you to Kristen and Mish and Julie. So happy to have you all as partners in this venture.